Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you again. I'm Dustin Cormier, and welcome to How to Rock Astrology. We are continuing our series today on Astrology Karma and Transformation by Arroyo. We are talking about, we're at Chapter 5, and we are talking about Saturn, its nature and cycles. Now, this is a hugely important part of all things Saturn. Saturn's cycles to its own natal position are a deeply important thing because Saturn is already the proprietor of a certain rhythm in human nature, as we've read in our last video. We talked about how even modern psychologists who are not into astrology are still doing research in statistical data and finding that there are key times in people's lives when they need to shed a skin, so to say, like a crustacean, shed a skin in order to come into a new embryonic state and develop on new things. This is true of Saturn's transit conjunct any planet. For example, Saturn transiting conjunct the moon is called Sati, and it's a difficult thing that starts off in a 7-year cycle. There's a 7-year point where it becomes square to that conjunction. Then there's the next 7 years it's opposite. The next 7 years it's squared again. And then in the final 7 years, it resolves the lessons of the last thing and comes into new ones. This can happen with Saturn in regards to any planet, and this video is talking about, in particular, the meaning and importance of Saturn going in a cycle and coming back to its natal point. That natal point being the place that it was when you were born. And that's called the Saturn return. And that's what we're talking about today. As usual, this is a live stream, so for anybody watching live, feel free to ask any questions, make a comment, and I'll try to answer them as best befits the nature of our discussion today. So, without further ado, the Saturn return. From our previous video, Stephen Arroyo says, I've emphasized in the above statements in the last video, I've emphasized the periods of approximately 7 years, which coincide with conjunctions, squares, and oppositions of transiting Saturn to its natal place or to any other place. There are almost always major adjustments called for at these times. Revisions of attitudes, important decisions, alteration of how much responsibility one is taking on, or how one views those responsibilities. Sometimes radical changes of lifestyle, profession, work structure, and personal life. I should say that he's speaking here particularly to Saturn transiting the squares or opposition aspects or conjunctions to its own place. Again, we're talking about Saturn return. In particular, even though these cycles are true of Saturn dealing with any other planet, this is especially true of itself because Saturn transiting to itself is how it grips its own ability to deal with itself. I hope that's clear. Saturn, this is why we're talking about the Saturn return as being this very important thing, because the principle of contraction, the principle of discipline, is about to meet itself as the principle of discipline in us. So our own sense of discipline is being transfixed. And it's going to ripple throughout the whole rest of our chart and the whole rest of our lives. Not just discipline, but also open-heartedness, ability to face the hard, difficult limitations and things we need to do in order to be our best selves. The Saturn return gives us the tools, the experiences that we need in order to be able to do that, which can be very difficult. So of all these transits, the Saturn return at the approximate ages of 29 to 58, 29 and 58, the age of 29 and the age of 58 have received the most attention in astrological writings. Unfortunately, the treatment of those crucial periods has often been rather on the negative side whenever we hear about Saturn returns, this big scary thing, emphasizing how difficult those periods are often felt to be. Therefore, it's appropriate that we explore the Saturn return here a bit more deeply. It should be noted that many of the concepts outlined below are also applicable to some extent to other transits of Saturn to its natal place as well. Right, so this is like other planets hitting your natal Saturn as well, especially Jupiter in particular. The first thing to clarify when speaking, I guess I should say, before I go on, I should say not just Jupiter there, but especially to like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto transits to your natal Saturn. Those are real deep indicators of necessary entanglements in things that need to be cleaved off in order to let your Saturn go free. So, the first thing to clarify when speaking of the Saturn return is that the quality of the entire experience and the extent to which it is felt to be a difficult time depends entirely on how one has lived during the previous 29 years, how much one has worked efficiently towards achieving specific goals, how much depth the person has built into their understanding and creative pursuits, and to what extent the individual has expressed or suppressed his or her fundamental nature. One cannot deduce the answer to all of these questions solely from the birth chart, for people are capable of working with and adjusting to the potentials shown in the natal map. However, one can get some useful hints by looking at the position of natal Saturn and its aspects. If the natal chart reveals considerable stress associated with Saturn, and therefore with the practical requirements of life, it is much more likely that this individual has had some difficulty in dealing with life's practical necessities. And therefore, the person may experience the Saturn return as a time of increased stress, as he or she is shown what further adjustments have to be made in order to fulfill the life pattern and potentials. If, for example, someone is born with Saturn in a close square conjunction or opposition to one of the personal planets, that individual will probably find that whatever conflicts or problems are so indicated will come into an even sharper focus during the Saturn return, thus necessitating some sort of definite action in facing up to these concerns. This is basically when Saturn is in aspect to anything in the chart. Saturn's malefic aspect is always going to give some kind of grip, even for those listening in my Vedic camp who know Saturn's individual aspects based on the Vedic sense. If Saturn has a grip and is causing trouble or is stunting the growth of anything natally, if Saturn is opposite any planet, or if Saturn's 10th aspect square is hitting, if a planet is 270 degrees from the natal Saturn, then when Saturn comes to its natal place and has the Saturn return, its relationship to that planet is also going to be affected. That planet is going to have a difficult time during the Saturn return, even though Saturn is not actually transiting that other planet directly. As long as the action is postponed or the need for it is repressed, the pressure of the Saturn return will not let up. But once the problems have been faced, no matter how painful such confrontation may be, there's often a noticeable alleviation of pressure and worry. If, on the other hand, the person has natal Saturn in primarily harmonious aspects with other planets, and especially if natal Saturn is in harmony with the Sun and or Moon. It is likely that the individual has incorporated Saturnian qualities and an awareness of practical requirements and duties into his character over many years. And hence, the lessons of Saturn will come as no surprise or shock, and may well be experienced as a time of confirming and solidifying many of the life orientations that the person has slowly been developing for years. I often say, I have a friend named Danny Fredericks, who's a cool musician that lives close to me, and he's also a fellow astrologer, and he's drenched with Capricorn qualities. He's got like a stellium in Capricorn, and what he says is that dealing with, including Saturn is well placed in Capricorn, and he says that dealing with Saturn is kind of like dealing with the boss. When the boss comes in, if you've been working, if you've been doing your job and your responsibilities and your duties, the boss could come in and he might actually give you a raise because he notices that you've done what you need to do, and now you can move to another step. You've impressed the boss, and they can bring you to opportunities now in a Saturn return moment that you didn't have before because you've dedicated yourself, shown that dedication, and it's now showing to people. And you gain opportunities that way. But if the boss comes in and you've been dicking around and playing hide and seek with the boss, suddenly they come in and they find you and you're not working, you have no work to show for it, that's when the boss gets angry and might fire you and might kick you out and cause you to do something that will make you interested, that will cause you to work. And if that means starving, you got a deal. You should have been paying attention. And so that's why the Saturn return is like the boss coming. And if you say, oh, the boss is coming, I better look busy, the boss might just decide today that he's going to audit the work that you've done. And you might have to really hear about it. But if you've been doing good, if you've been doing the work for the boss and he comes in to do his audit to see how much work you've been doing, he could give you rewards for the work that you've put in. So if, as is Stephen Arroyo continues, if, as is often the case, the individual has both harmonious and inharmonious aspects with natal Saturn, constructive developments and growth of confidence may come in one area of life during the Saturn return, at the same time that the person is being challenged to confront some other problematical dimension of life. So the first cycle of Saturn through the natal chart during the first 29 years or so of life is primarily based upon reaction to past conditioning, karma, parental influences, and social structures. So that's what we deal with before we're 29 years old. It's our reaction to our past life conditioning, past genetic ancestral seed data code, past karma, parental influences, and social pressures. During that period, prior to 29 years old, one is usually rather unconscious of who and what one is in a fundamental way. But then, at the first Saturn return, it often seems like an old debt is being discharged, and many old karmic patterns and obligations are rather quite suddenly removed. Excuse me. At that time, one can experience a profoundly complex state of being, for there's simultaneously a feeling of unalterable limitation in one's life structure and a feeling of inner freedom that in some cases is accompanied by exhilaration and inspiring joy. I totally get that. Saturn, it's like before you find what you want to be, you are a nebulous cloud of leaking wonder and energy and dissatisfaction because you're dissatisfied with being this or that person or this or that person. Once Saturn return comes, it puts you in a necessary slot where you have no choice but to put your eggs into what you've been building yourself to be for the last 29 years. And when you finally commit to everything that you are and you put all those eggs in that basket, it's like, well, there's nowhere else to put my eggs in my basket. I'm not holding on to my eggs. I'm not juggling them anymore. Now I'm finally putting them somewhere. Even if they don't manifest in the material world, at least I'm finally committing to a life here on planet Earth. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But at least I got somewhere to plant my seed. This is this sense of freedom that's ironically also a limit, putting you in a form, a slot, an identity, somewhere on a mountain, right? The sense of limitation arises from the fact that one becomes aware, to a greater extent than ever before, of what one's destiny is, and therefore what one has to do from here on out. No longer are there seemingly endless opportunities and alternatives. You now know that you've made your experiments, you've lived out your youthful illusions, but that from now on you have to work at fulfilling your role in a vast drama, even if you have no idea how you have come to be assigned to the part that you're now playing. It's more of a Jupiter thing, really. Your responsibilities to yourself and to others are now seen with sharpened clarity, and perhaps some of these responsibilities feel heavy and confining. But at the same time, you can experience a profound inner freedom resulting from the realization that you are no longer bound by old obligations, fears, and inner restrictions. This feeling of unlimited inner freedom is also based on a clearer understanding of your real needs, capabilities, and creative potentialities. If you are the kind of person who has been waiting during your youth for the time when you could really find yourself and begin to express yourself with assurance and marked influence, your waiting is over. Like I said, I'm going through it too, so. Now is the time to act, to work, and to live in the present with acceptance of your destiny and joy in the knowledge that your path is now clear. This transition period doesn't happen all at once. In fact, it may take place over a period of 2 to 2.5 years, surrounding the date of the Saturn return, of the close, absolute conjunction aspect. But if you always felt thwarted in childhood and adolescence, feeling perhaps that you were just serving time and having to endure things that were neither fulfilling nor controllable, you could, at this time, mobilize your energies with great power, ambition, and even a sense of relief that your waiting is over, and now, in the Saturn return, you can begin to mold your own life with some degree of awareness. As Grant Louis put it in Astrology for the Millions, you stand freed when this transit is past of many erstwhile inner restrictions. You will have swept your nature clean of dead wood and cleared the decks for action that now proceeds less impeded by internal complexes and personal difficulties. You will, in short, have matured, put away childish things, and you'll be ready to take your place in the world as an adult. This is still Grant Louis in Astrology for the Millions. Saturn's transit of his own place is the most important point at which free will operates in the life, untrammeled and as free of circumstances as it will ever be. You will not stand so free again. The choices you make are yours. Make them wisely, for here, make your choices wisely, for here it is that your free will, in a very real sense, forges your fate for a long time to come, if not, indeed, for the rest of your life. Very cool. Your Saturn is what it is, and what you do during your Saturn return is going to be what your Saturn is for time to come. I'm just reading my friend Ronnie's description of Saturn's maturity, and Saturn, where Saturn is where maturity and lessons need to be gained. You're correct, Ronnie. And I'm noticing you said that those with Saturn at 0 degrees have had it really rough. And I appreciate you saying that, Ronnie. I would love to know where you're getting that idea from. Not that I'm challenging you, but I'd love to hear where it's from. Yep, very cool. My Saturn is at 0 degrees, and I find that's just fascinating for you to say that, because I've had some crazy times, but I think I'm getting on top of it. So, let's continue in our reading. So, if one confronts the first Saturn return with great courage and honesty, then during Saturn's second 29-year cycle, one is more conscious, more able to initiate action without being inhibited by fear and anxiety, and more capable of taking responsibility for oneself and one's experiences. If one successfully tunes in on his or her true destiny as an individual soul during this period, one can thereafter live more in the present, with the greater patience gained from having submitted to his or her inner law with full awareness and acceptance. During this time, one's potential for worldly success and authority are often consolidated in some direct way, and one is given specific insights about the role one is to play in the world from that point on. Good stuff. God bless Stephen Arroyo. That's the reason why I said that the transits section is particularly deep and helpful and useful in regards to this book in particular. Now, Stephen Arroyo has given us a note. Every now and then he goes to these little notations at the bottom of the book, and he says, a study of famous people and their experiences at the time of the Saturn return can quickly confirm this astrological tradition. For example, Gertrude Stein, whose Saturn return happened while she was 29 years old, wrote the following in her Fernhurst. Quote, "It happens often in the 29th year of life that all the forces that have been engaged through the years of childhood, adolescence, and youth in confused and ferocious combat range themselves in ordered ranks. One is uncertain of one's aims, meaning, and power during these years of tumultuous growth, when aspiration has no relation to fulfillment, and one plunges here and there with energy and misdirection during the storm and stress of the making of a personality, until at last we reach the 29th year, the straight and narrow gateway of maturity and life, which was all uproar and confusion, narrows down to form and purpose, and we exchange a great dim possibility for a small, hard reality." Also, in our American life, where there is no coercion and custom, and it is our right to change our vocation so often as we have desire and opportunity, it's a common experience that our youth extends through the whole first 29 years of our life. And it's not until we reach the age of 30 that we find at last that vocation for which we feel ourselves fit and to which we willingly devote continued labor. It's from page 29 to 30 of Fernhurst. Wonderful. I love that one line in particular. So, hence, if one confronts the first Saturn return with great courage and honesty, then, during Saturn's second 29-year cycle, one is more conscious, more able to initiate action without being inhibited by fear and anxiety. So I just realized that was continuing from where we were before. Saturn's natal house and the natal house, which is ruled by Saturn, are usually areas of life that are further defined with deepened understanding at this time. So not only is wherever Saturn is in your chart, but also whatever houses Capricorn and Aquarius rules. For example, I'm a Leo rising, and I'm experiencing my Saturn return. Wherever my Saturn return is, it happens to be going through Aquarius because my Saturn's in Aquarius. But let's say if I had Saturn in Gemini and Saturn was presently transiting Gemini, that means I would have to learn to grip Saturn as it relates to its natal place in Gemini. But also, as a Leo rising, I also have to deal with what Saturn means as the ruler of the 6th and 7th house. Because in my chart, the 6th cusp falls in Capricorn, and the 7th cusp falls in Aquarius, because I'm a Leo rising. Capricorn being the 6th house from Leo, Aquarius being the 7th house from Leo. So my 6th and 7th house are going through a necessary, complete overhaul, along with Saturn's natal place in Gemini in this hypothetical. And Stephen Arroyo goes on, and there are usually noticeable physical changes, as would be expected since Saturn has such an affinity for material existence. Not only are there often physical signs of age manifesting as health problems that make one realize his or her physical limitations, but also the individual's center of gravity, Saturn, shifts in such a way that one begins to notice that he has a deeper reservoir of energy available to him. The person's general energy level may be noticeably less than when he was in his early or mid-20s, but the energy available now, after the Saturn return, is more concentrated, not so scattered, and it is a more reliable and steady sort of energy flow. The center of gravity shifts from the head, neck, and chest areas to the pelvis and abdomen. What was just in the person's head before becomes a more integral part of their entire body, i.e., of their real life experience. Hence, the person finds that they don't need to use so much energy as when they were younger. The energy is naturally conserved and steadied, and it is up to the individual person to learn how to live with and utilize this new mode of energy flow. It can be a very positive thing, typically brought on by challenging things. It's just the nature of Saturn and the reward that comes from the great effort that it requires, that nature and its cycles naturally brings out of us. Now that was that for Saturn return, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to close this part of this episode. For those watching live, I have some viewers still. Feel free to keep watching. We're going to talk a little bit about something called Sati before we continue our discussion about Saturn. Sati is a Vedic tradition, which, for all in the West we consider the Saturn return to be a very important transit, just like the Vedic does. But Vedic astrology has another thing that's just as epic, just as painful, but just as rewarding in its tradition, and that is when natal Saturn transits conjunct the natal moon. When Saturn transits the natal moon position, this is something called Sati, and it has a 7-year effect as well. It's the 2.5 years of, 2 1/3 years of Saturn being in the sign behind the moon, the 12th house from the moon. Saturn, 2.5 whatever years of Saturn being in the sign of the natal moon. And then finally, it's the 2.5 year period of Saturn transiting the 2nd house from the moon. That whole 3 sign period adds up to about 7 years. and is probably even more painful for a lot of people than Saturn return. It's a different thing. It's not our grip on Saturn. If we go through our Saturn return, it'll be easier to deal with Sati. If you go through Sati first, which you're basically bound to, I guess, all things considered. In any case, Saturn will give you a capacity to deal with this Saturn transiting the moon thing, but Saturn transiting the moon is its own thing, where you need your mystical resources, you need your love and companionship and your heart to open to others so that you don't kill yourself. Just like any transit, just like the Saturn return, it's hard, but it's not necessarily that hard. It was tough for me. I had to try not to kill myself during Sati. I made it through okay. It wasn't like I'm not the type of person to do that, but at the time, man, it was tough. I digress. So that's what we're going to talk about in our next video. For those who enjoyed this video, the Saturn return video, please like, subscribe, make a comment if you like. I hope you enjoyed. Ask me any questions and I'll try to speak to them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, maybe you might enjoy the rest of this series where we talk about Saturn in relationship to karma, and we talk about all of the planets, especially the outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, in relationship to karma, in relationship to past lives, present life, and the positivity that these limiting planets can bring to our growth if we understand them correctly. If you guys enjoyed, watch the rest of this series. And again, for those watching live, I'm going to be on in about like another 5 minutes. I'm just going to figure some things out. I'm going to get my other book, and we're going to talk about Sati. Thanks for watching, folks. As I said, for those watching live, it's going to be a long series tonight. We're probably going to go till midnight or